A dull, persistent ache had been my unwelcome companion for days, a shadowy tendril creeping from my gut and winding its way up my spine. Initially, I dismissed it as the familiar grip of stress, another quarterly strategy review, another endless cycle of hollow pep talks and pointless meetings. But that morning, as I stepped into the frigid air of the conference room, the ache sharpened, twisting into something far more sinister. I paused at the threshold, my hand cold against the metallic doorframe, a fleeting thought of food poisoning flickering through my mind. Years of being told to man up, to walk it off, had forged me into a master of pain suppression, a connoisseur of the practiced smile that masked internal turmoil. By the way, please like and subscribe if you enjoy stories like this. I'd powered through countless deadlines with a skull-splitting headache, presented at every meeting with that unwavering, reassuring nod, signaling all was well. But today, as I shuffled past the gleaming glass walls and sank into my accustomed seat, an unsettling shift had occurred. A hollow pit of dread had taken root beneath my ribs, stubbornly defying every ounce of willpower I possessed. The room buzzed with its usual symphony of tailored suits and saccharine optimism. Colleagues flipped through printed decks, treating each slide as sacred scripture. The words on the screen swam before my eyes, an incomprehensible blur, the comforting clarity of numbers now an elusive memory. Alan, my boss, droned on, his voice a monotonous hum, a persistent wasp buzzing in my ear, about synergy and market share. I attempted to sip my coffee, but my hand betrayed me, trembling violently, forcing me to set the cup down before it cascaded. A cold sweat pricked at my hairline, tracing a chilling path down my face, clinging to my collar. My breath hitched, a strained, labored gasp as if my very lungs had forgotten their purpose. I gripped the edge of the table, knuckles stark white, desperately trying to anchor myself to the polished wood, the familiar texture that had seen me through 1,000 boardroom skirmishes. But the pain, unrelenting, refused to be silenced. It began as a sharp, agonizing twist, then spiraled, transforming into the searing sensation of a serrated blade carving through my abdomen. My vision doubled, the faces in the room dissolving into worried, annoyed smudges. I heard Alan speak my name, sharp and clipped, as if I had dared to interrupt his performance. I tried to respond, but the words withered in my throat. Another wave of torment, sudden and brutal, wrenched a sound from me, a raw cry somewhere between a gasp and a groan. I attempted to swallow it down, but it was too late. My own body had turned against me. I pitched forward, my head striking the table with a dull thud that echoed like the world's end. The fall to the floor, the startled cries, the frantic scramble of footsteps, it all remained a void. The next conscious moment found me flat on my back, staring up at the unforgiving fluorescent lights of the ceiling, each one a searing blade of white fire in my eyes. Paramedics, clad in crisp blue uniforms, swarmed around me, their voices a hurried murmur of urgency and protocol. One of them, a woman with eyes that held an unexpected kindness, gently placed an oxygen mask over my mouth, urging me to breathe. I tried, but each inhalation felt like it was tearing something vital apart within me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird, its wings fluttering in a desperate bid for freedom. Through the haze of agony, my clumsy, half-numb fingers fumbled for my phone. Alex. I needed Alex. She would know what to do. She would be there. I pressed call, listening to the agonizing rings. On the third, she answered, her voice sharp, distracted. Can it wait? She snapped. Brennan's got his big investor presentation today. I tried to speak, tried to convey my fear, my desperate need for her. But the words became a tangled mess in my throat, suffocated by the oxygen mask and the relentless beeping of machines. Alex, I croaked, but she was already gone. She hung up without a second thought, leaving me to stare at the screen, her name fading like a ghost. The paramedics moved with swift, practiced efficiency, lifting me onto a stretcher. Their hands, though gentle, were firm, guiding me through the encroaching chaos. The conference room, a distant memory, its glass walls now a receding image, slipped through my fingers. The pain surged again, white-hot and merciless, and I clenched my teeth to stifle a scream. I heard someone, perhaps Alan, mention getting back to the agenda about continuing the meeting. My stomach churned. Even now, they couldn't pause for a single breath. The hallway became a blur of white and gray figures rushing past like specters. The paramedics spoke in clipped, calm tones, but their eyes betrayed a tense worry. I caught fragments. Appendix. Possible rupture. Blood pressure dropping. I struggled to focus on their faces, to cling to something human, but the world seemed to be dissolving around me. My vision dimmed at the edges, colors leaching away into a cold gray mist. The ambulance ride was a feverish nightmare. Sirens wailed, lights flashed, but inside the space felt impossibly small, the air thick with antiseptic and a pervasive dread. A young paramedic, his face flecked with freckles, leaned over me, his voice a steady anchor. "We're taking you to St. Luke's," he murmured. "You're going to be okay. Just hang on." I nodded, or believed I did. Every movement felt disjointed, as if I were a puppet, controlled by unseen strings from a great distance. I thought of Alex, of her voice, her profound indifference. Couldn't it wait? I had given her everything, my time, my heart, my unwavering trust. And now, when it mattered most, she was absent. The betrayal burned with an intensity that eclipsed the physical agony, a different kind of wound, one no surgeon could mend. I wondered if she would even check in later or if Brennan's pitch deck would consume her entirely. A cold trickle traced a path down my cheek. Tears? Sweat? I couldn't discern. The hospital doors swung open and a swarm of nurses and doctors descended upon me like a sudden storm. They barraged me with questions, inserted IV lines, their voices a chaotic symphony as they monitored screens that beeped with alarming urgency. My world constricted, shrinking to the sterile white walls and the incessant beeping of machines that meticulously counted each passing second. I clung to consciousness, a desperate act of will. A nurse, her eyes filled with a gentle compassion, squeezed my hand, her grip steady, grounding. "You're going into surgery," she said, her voice soothing. "We're going to take care of you. Just hold on." I longed to ask for Alex, to believe she would burst through those doors, breathless with worry, but I knew better. I closed my eyes, surrendering to the encroaching darkness, alone on a stretcher, unsure if I would ever awaken. I survived, barely. The surgeon's voice, calm yet weary, echoed in my mind long after his explanation had concluded. "Appendicitis complicated by peritonitis," he'd stated, drawing a neat line in the air as if it were a simple equation, but the pain had been anything but simple. They'd rushed me into the operating room, a blur of knives, harsh lights, and sterile smells, masked faces hovering above me. When I awoke days later, it was to a stark white room and the low, persistent hum of machines tethering me to this side of consciousness. Every breath was an effort, my body profoundly weak, as if I'd been meticulously broken down and painfully reassembled. Nurse Camille was the first truly human face I saw. Soft brown eyes, a voice that felt like a reassuring hand on my shoulder. She told me I'd been fortunate, that immediate surgery had saved my life. I nodded, my head heavy, my mind a fog of anesthesia and shock. She checked the machines, inquired about my pain, then almost as an afterthought mentioned, "We didn't have a record of any family contact. Is someone coming?" The question struck me like a physical blow. My wife, the one person who should have been here. My throat was too parched to speak. I closed my eyes, letting the question hang in the air, unanswered. 3 days bled into one another. A blur of IV drips, hourly checks, and the pervasive scent of disinfectant that clung to every inhalation. Each time the door opened, my heart would momentarily lift, clinging to the futile hope that it might be Alex, that she would stride in with flowers and apologies, proclaiming she'd been worried sick. But the door consistently opened for nurses with polite smiles, doctors with clipped questions, and the occasional housekeeping staff. No Alex, no indication she had even called. The nurses struggled to conceal their pity when they inquired about my family. I offered them the same response each time. "She's busy." I'd utter it as if it were a joke, but with each repetition, a part of me felt smaller, more insignificant. On the fourth morning, the fluorescent lights flickered, and I woke to voices just outside my room. Familiar ones. Alex's voice, sharp, impatient, slicing through the sterile hush. Brennan's laugh, a low, easy sound that always made my skin crawl. I strained to discern the words, catching fragmented phrases between the rustle of nurses and the hum of machines. "The presentation went so well," Brennan declared, his voice slick with self-satisfaction. "They loved the concept. Funding's all but secured." Alex replied, "I'm glad. It's about time things went our way." I could practically visualize her smile, the one that never quite reached her eyes. They burst in as if they owned the place, as if I were merely an inconvenient stop on their way to a more important engagement. Alex's hair was meticulously styled, her makeup flawless, the epitome of a woman who had meticulously planned her visit. Brennan looked as if he'd just stepped off a stage, his suit crisp, his grin practiced. Alex's eyes swept over me, a quick clinical assessment. "How are you feeling?" she asked, her tone an afterthought. I opened my mouth to respond, but she had already turned to Brennan, laughing at some shared inside joke. It felt as though I was watching a movie of my own life from the cheap seats. I yearned to ask her where she had been, why she hadn't come when I needed her most, but my mouth was dry, my tongue heavy, and my heart even heavier. Nurse Camille slipped in quietly, her presence a calming balm against the coldness in the room. She held a clipboard, her face set in that polite but firm expression I had come to rely on. She moved towards Alex, extending the clipboard with a pen clipped to the top. "Mrs. Carter," she said, addressing her by my name, a name that suddenly felt foreign. "We need you to sign this." Alex's face transformed instantly, her eyes narrowing, jaw tightening as she took the clipboard. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice a sharp crack in the quiet room. Camille didn't flinch. "It's a routine update. It confirms your role in his medical decisions." Her eyes flicked to me, a subtle question in her shifting gaze. Alex began reading the document, her fingers trembling slightly. "Why would I need to sign this now? I'm his wife." Brennan shifted beside her, his smirk slipping just a little. I remained silent, letting the silence stretch like a honed blade between us. Camille's voice was calm but unwavering. "Because the form has been updated," she explained. "Your husband, Mr. Carter, made some changes to his emergency contact and medical proxy after his surgery." She turned to me, her eyes softening, but her words felt like a hammer driving home a nail. "Mr. Carter, do you want me to explain it, or would you like to?" I swallowed, my throat raw. "I'd prefer you did," I croaked, my voice thin but steady. Camille nodded, turning back to Alex. "The medical proxy now lists Mateo Ramirez as the designated contact," she stated. "As such, any decisions regarding his care beyond standard treatment must be discussed with Mr. Ramirez unless Mr. Carter requests otherwise." Alex's face went pale, her lips pressed together so tightly they seemed to vanish. Brennan's smirk was utterly gone, replaced by something akin to panic. Alex turned to me, eyes wide, voice trembling. You did this?" she asked. her tone accusing as if I had committed some profound betrayal. I met her gaze, unflinching. "Yes," I said. "I did." She gaped at me as if I'd grown another head. "But I'm your wife!" she cried, her voice rising, drawing the attention of the nurse at the station outside. Brennan shifted uncomfortably, his foot tapping a nervous rhythm on the tile. Something hardened inside me, a resolve I hadn't known I possessed. "I know," I said, "but you weren't here when I needed you. Mateo was." Brennan let out a derisive snort, but I didn't even look at him. My eyes were locked on Alex, waiting to see if the woman I'd once loved could truly comprehend the damage she'd inflicted. Camille cleared her throat. "Mrs. Carter, I understand this is difficult, but it's his right to make this choice. If you have any questions about the process, I'd be happy to answer them later." She guided them towards the door with gentle firmness, giving me a small nod that felt like an embrace. Alex paused in the doorway, her mouth opening as if to protest, but no words emerged. Brennan's hand on her arm guided her out, his eyes cold as they met mine. I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. I just stared at the ceiling, my chest rising and falling in steady, measured breaths. The door closed with a soft click, leaving me alone with the machines and my thoughts. I wasn't being petty. I wasn't being vindictive. I was protecting myself because the people who should have held my hand chose a pitch deck over my pulse. And in that sterile, too quiet room, I decided I would never let them choose for me again. I stared at the ceiling, feeling the oppressive weight of the air around me, like a heavy, suffocating blanket. My body ached in ways I hadn't known were possible, but the pain was no longer sharp. It had settled into a dull throb that mirrored the steady beat of the heart monitor, a constant reminder that I was alive, that I had survived something that had nearly claimed me, and that somehow felt both miraculous and hollow. The quiet in the room was a gift I hadn't realized I needed, providing the precious space to think, to breathe, to painstakingly piece together the shattered fragments of the last few days. The door opened quietly and Nurse Camille stepped in, her eyes warm but professional. She carried a small stack of papers neatly clipped together, and from her posture I sensed this was no routine check-in. She pulled a chair from the corner and settled beside my bed. "Mr. Carter," she began, her voice soft but steady, "we need to discuss something important." My breath hitched. I'd had enough important conversations lately to last a lifetime, but I nodded, letting her continue. "It's about your emergency contact and medical proxy," she said. "You listed Mateo Ramirez as your new contact after the surgery." She handed me the papers. My hands trembled slightly as I took them. I thought back to that moment, the darkness after surgery, the chilling realization that I had woken up alone, that no one I expected had been there. But Mateo had. Mateo, who had driven 2 hours without me even asking, who had slept in the uncomfortable plastic chair next to my bed when no one else showed up. I remembered the way he'd gripped my hand and said, "You're not alone, man. I got you." And in that moment, I knew I didn't owe anyone my loyalty simply because we shared a last name. Family isn't always who you're born to, it's who shows up. Camille cleared her throat gently. "Legally," she continued, "this means that decisions about your care, anything beyond standard procedures, must go through Mr. Ramirez unless you instruct otherwise." She paused. "Your wife, Alex, she's not listed on your medical proxy anymore." She studied my face for a reaction, but I kept my expression calm, letting the truth settle like a heavy stone at the bottom of a pond. "That's how it should be," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. She didn't answer when I needed her. Camille nodded. "I understand," she said. "We just wanted to confirm that this was intentional and that you're aware of the implications." The door opened again, and Alex and Brennan strode in as if they owned the place. Alex's expression was a mix of confusion and indignation, her jaw tight. She scanned the room like it was some courtroom where she'd been wronged. Brennan looked smug, as if he'd already decided this was a waste of his precious time. Camille stood and turned to them with a practiced smile. "Mrs. Carter," she greeted. "Mr. Carter has updated his emergency contact and medical proxy." She wasted no words. I respected that about her. Alex's eyes widened. "What?" she said, her voice high and brittle. She glanced at me as if I had just confessed to a heinous crime. You changed it without telling me?" I took a breath, trying to steady the trembling in my hands. "After the surgery," I said, my voice low. "When I woke up, you weren't here. Mateo was. He's the one who showed up." I kept my eyes locked on her, unflinching. I needed someone I could trust. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "But I'm your wife," she finally managed. The word felt foreign on her tongue, as though she were trying to convince herself of its meaning. Brennan snorted. "This is ridiculous," he sneered. "Mateo's not even family. You're making a mistake." His voice dripped with contempt, as if he couldn't fathom a world where I might choose loyalty over obligation. Camille stepped between us, her presence a calm but unwavering force. "Mr. Carter has the legal right to choose his own emergency contact," she stated. "It's his decision, and it's been documented and filed." Alex shook her head, her hair falling across her face. "You can't just replace me," she stammered. "We're married. That means something." I looked at her then, truly looked at her, and saw the immense distance that had been growing between us for months, years even. Perhaps it was more than just the investor presentations and the late nights. It was the choices she'd made over and over again to put Brennan, her brother, first, to prioritize their ambitions, their goals, their big picture ahead of the man who was supposed to be her partner. "I didn't want to do this," I said quietly, "but I needed to know that someone would actually be there when I couldn't speak for myself. And you weren't." My voice cracked, the raw hurt breaking through the anger. "I called you from that ambulance, Alex. I could barely breathe, and you told me to wait." Brennan shifted uncomfortably. "Look," he said, his tone patronizing, "this is all getting blown out of proportion. We're family. We need to stick together." I turned to him, my eyes cold. "Were we family when you stood by while she ignored me? Were we family when you laughed about your presentation instead of asking if I'd live?" Silence settled in the room, heavy as stone. Camille cleared her throat. "Mrs. Carter, Mr. Brennan," she said, "if you have any further questions, please address them through Mr. Carter's designated contact. Otherwise, I need to ask you to leave so he can rest." Alex's face crumpled for a moment, her eyes shining with something I couldn't quite name. Guilt, anger, maybe both. But then she turned to Brennan, her features hardening, and nodded. They left without another word, the door clicking shut behind them like a final verdict. I sank back into the bed, exhausted but strangely relieved. The silence felt different now, less like a punishment, more like a clean slate. Camille turned to me with a small smile. "You did the right thing," she said. "It's your life, your voice." I nodded, the knot in my chest loosening just a little. "Thank you," I whispered. She patted my hand, then left me alone with my thoughts. I stared at the ceiling, breathing in the quiet. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was the one in control of my own story. No matter what came next, I wouldn't let anyone else decide how it ended. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly as I took my first tentative steps out of the room, the IV pole rolling beside me like a silent companion. My legs were shaky, each step an echo of the pain I'd endured, but I pushed forward, determined to stretch my body and perhaps in the process stretch my mind back into shape. Nurse Camille had encouraged me to walk, to breathe, to reclaim the space that had become my entire world since surgery. The quiet hum of the hospital at night was a strange comfort. Machines beeped in a steady rhythm, nurses murmured in hushed tones. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and something else. Perhaps hope, perhaps dread. I wasn't sure anymore. I rounded a corner and nearly collided with Mateo, who had an uncanny knack for appearing precisely when I needed him most. He wore his usual easy grin, but his eyes were serious, searching my face as if measuring the damage. "Hey, man," he said, taking the IV pole from my hand and guiding me to a small alcove with 2 chairs. "You're supposed to be resting." I tried to smile, but it felt forced, a mask that no longer fit. "I needed to move," I muttered. He nodded, the corners of his eyes creasing with worry. "I get it, but you also need to let yourself heal physically." And he didn't finish, but I knew what he meant. Emotionally, spiritually, every way a person can be broken and stitched back together. We sat there in the alcove, the hospital's hum a constant backdrop. Mateo pulled out his phone and scrolled for a second. "I got in touch with Soraya," he said. My stomach tightened at the mention of her name. Soraya had been in HR at my company once, a detail-oriented force of nature who never missed a discrepancy. "She's already looking into the insurance situation," Mateo continued. "It's weird. She found a ton of missing paperwork, like someone had flagged your onboarding file for deletion." A cold shiver ran down my spine. Flagged as intentionally erased? Mateo met my gaze, his jaw tightening. "Yeah, she's sure of it." A sick feeling settled in my gut. I thought back to the months before this mess when Alex had offered to help me with the benefits paperwork, just to be sure it all went through. She'd said it, smiling in that easy way that made me believe she was doing me a favor. She'd been volunteering in HR at the time, a courtesy project Brennan had arranged so she could keep busy. I'd thought nothing of it. Why would I? She was my wife. The thought hit me like a punch now. "So it's possible," I said slowly, "that she deleted my benefits file on purpose." Mateo's eyes darkened. "Yeah, man, it looks like sabotage." My heart clenched, a new kind of pain that had nothing to do with my surgery. All those nights I'd spent worrying about deadlines, about performance reviews and project timelines, all while the person who was supposed to have my back was quietly gutting my safety net. "Why would she do that?" I whispered, more to myself than to Mateo. He shrugged, but the answer was etched in the lines around his eyes. "Maybe because it's easier to drain you dry when you're already hurting," he said. "Or maybe she and Brennan needed a financial scapegoat. I don't know." I closed my eyes, breathing in the antiseptic air, letting the words sink in. The betrayal felt like a second wound, deeper and more jagged than the first. "Soraya is going to send me the full report," Mateo said, his voice gentler now. "We'll get to the bottom of it, I promise." I nodded, but my hands were trembling. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, the ground crumbling under my feet. Every memory of Alex's smile, every late-night text telling me she loved me, every morning coffee we'd shared, they all felt like lies now, carefully constructed to keep me complacent. Mateo reached over and gripped my shoulder, steadying me. "You're not alone in this," he said. "We'll fight it, every piece of it." I met his eyes, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the old me, the one who believed in people, who believed that love was stronger than betrayal. I wanted that man back. I wanted to believe again. But the ground was too unsteady, the trust too broken. "Thanks, man," I murmured. "I don't even know where to start." Mateo squeezed my shoulder. "You start by healing," he said. "Let Soraya do her thing. Let me help. You've carried too much on your own for too long." We sat there in silence for a moment, the weight of everything pressing down, but also somehow lifting. Just having him there, Having someone in my corner who wasn't part of the betrayal felt like a lifeline. A nurse walked by and gave us a polite smile, but I barely registered it. My mind was spinning with memories. Alex's laughter in the kitchen, her late-night phone calls with Brennan that she'd brushed off as just work. Every piece felt like a puzzle I'd never really seen until now, and the picture it formed was ugly. I trusted her, I whispered, more to the ceiling than to Mateo. God, I trusted her. Mateo didn't interrupt. He let the words hang there, let them breathe. And she took that trust and turned it into a weapon, I continued. I gave her everything, and she used it against me. My voice cracked, the hurt breaking through the anger. I hated how weak it sounded, but I didn't care anymore. I was done pretending. We're going to fix this, Mateo said, his voice firm. One step at a time. You're not going to let her or him win. I nodded, letting the words sink in. One step at a time, I echoed. I knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be lawyers, accountants, maybe even police. There would be days when I'd want to crawl back into the safety of that old life, to believe the lie that everything could go back to normal. But I also knew that I couldn't, not anymore. Alex had crossed a line and there was no coming back from that. Mateo stood, offering his hand. Let's get you back to bed, he said, his smile returning. You've got healing to do, and tomorrow we start figuring out how to make this right. I took his hand and let him guide me back to my room. As I settled under the sterile sheets, I felt something inside me shift. A small spark of strength, a quiet resolve that told me I was done being the victim, that no matter how long it took, I would get to the bottom of every lie, every betrayal. And when I did, I would make sure that the people who tried to bury me would finally understand that I wasn't going down without a fight. I didn't recognize the stack of bills that arrived in my mailbox the day after I got home. Each envelope felt heavier than the last, each printed name. A hospital, a surgeon, a medication supplier, like an accusation I couldn't defend. I sat at the kitchen table, Mateo across from me, his brow furrowed in that way he had when he was calculating solutions. He'd taken it upon himself to help me sort through everything, unasked but deeply appreciated. It's going to be okay, he said quietly. I almost laughed at the lie, but the effort felt too heavy on my chest. Mateo, they owe over $100,000, I whispered, my voice hoarse from days of silent worry. I picked up a bill and ran my thumb over the hospital logo. Every single one of these has my name on it. Every single one. My stomach churned, a nauseating twist of anger and disbelief. I had insurance, I said, as if speaking it aloud might reverse the stark reality staring back at me. We paid into that plan every month. This shouldn't even be possible. Mateo nodded, scanning the spreadsheet he'd started populating. Names, dates, amounts, a chilling accounting of my financial collapse. Yeah, I know, he murmured. But when Soraya looked into it, she found the benefits paperwork had been deleted from your file. Everything, all of it, like you'd never enrolled. He sighed. This wasn't some clerical error. It was deliberate. The realization settled in my chest like wet cement. I closed my eyes, picturing Alex's face the day she offered to help out with HR. She'd called it a courtesy, a way to show support, while she was between consulting gigs. You're always so busy, she'd said, running a hand through my hair. Let me handle the paperwork. I'll make sure everything's in order. I thanked her. I trusted her. That trust had now blossomed into the biggest mistake of my life. Mateo's fingers drummed lightly on the table, his mind clearly working a mile a minute. I talked to Zaria, he said, his eyes flicking to me. She's a forensic accountant now, tough as nails. I gave her access to your accounts with your permission, and she's already found some weird stuff. He slid a file across the table. I opened it and felt the blood drain from my face. There it was in stark black and white, bank withdrawals I didn't recognize, ghost credit card charges from places I'd never been, but the one that made my hand shake was the transfer, a significant chunk of money that I'd saved over the years, the safety net for our future, gone. $42,000, I murmured, my voice cracking. That was supposed to be for our house. Alex always said it got absorbed into expenses. Mateo's jaw clenched. It didn't, he said flatly. Zaria traced it. It went straight to Brainius Ventures, Brennan's company, every last cent. I felt like I'd been punched. My vision swam. All those late nights working overtime, every birthday dinner I'd skipped to save up, wasted, betrayed. She lied, I whispered. She stole from me and gave it to him. My hands balled into fists. That was supposed to be our future. She took that and gave it away like it meant nothing. Mateo reached across the table and gripped my wrist. She doesn't get to do this without consequences, he said, his voice low and steady. We'll get it back. We'll fight this. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But every part of me felt hollow, like someone had scooped out the man I used to be and left an empty shell. I don't even know where to start, I confessed, my voice trembling. Mateo didn't let go. You start with this, he said, pointing to the file. You build a case. You get the right people to see it, and you remember who you are. You're not just a victim, man. You're the guy who fought through surgery alone. You're the guy who's still standing. His words lit a spark in me, a flicker of the fire I thought I'd lost. I straightened in my chair, the pain in my side a fierce reminder that I'd survived worse than this. Okay, I said. Okay, what's the next step? Mateo smiled, a fierce glint in his eyes. We go to Zaria's office, he said. We get every document, every transaction, and we call a lawyer. He leaned in. You have the receipts now. It's time to make them pay. The drive to Zaria's office felt like a journey into the heart of every bad decision I'd ever made. The city blurred by, gray and cold, and I found myself staring into the window's unforgiving reflection, a stark mirror to a stranger. Who was this hollowed-out man? Mateo's voice was a distant hum beside me, his words on the plan mere fragments of a storm. Fraud, financial ruin, the specter of criminal charges. Each word was a heavy, metallic clang, yet they felt like a long-awaited armor, finally settling upon my weary frame. Zaria's office was a converted warehouse, a testament to industrial chic with its exposed brick and raw edges. She met us at the threshold, a tall sentinel with eyes like honed steel and an aura that screamed, "No nonsense." Let's get to it, she commanded, ushering us into a war room littered with printouts and spreadsheets. I've traced every suspicious transaction. A stack of papers slid across the polished surface, a financial autopsy. My gaze devoured the list, withdrawals from my own accounts to phantom shell companies, credit card charges that perfectly mirrored Brennan's reckless travel, payments to consultants I'd never even heard of. A knot tightened in my gut. How did they ever imagine escaping this? I rasped, my voice raw with disbelief. Zaria's eyebrow arched, a silent indictment. Because you trusted them, she stated, her voice devoid of inflection. They counted on that blind faith. A quiet, dangerous rage began to coil within me, a pressure so immense it threatened to shatter everything if unleashed. But I held it captive, my focus unyielding, locked onto the numbers, the dates, the irrefutable truth. Can we prove it? I demanded. Zaria's smile was a sliver of ice. Oh, we can prove it, she promised, a chilling resolve in her tone. We'll ensure they can't run from this. You've got a paper trail a mile long. Mateo leaned back, a predatory gleam in his eyes. They were sloppy, man, he declared, his smile fierce. This is just the beginning. They tried to bury you. Now you get to bury them. Something within me clicked, a silent, unshakable resolve. I wasn't done. Perhaps, just perhaps, I would emerge from this crucible stronger than they had ever dared to imagine. I gathered the damning papers, each sheet a shard of the story they had so carelessly tried to conceal. "Let's bring this house of cards down," I declared, my voice steady, resolute. And for the first time in an eternity, I believed I could. The guest room, now my makeshift office, lay strewn with financial documents, a sprawling map of every misstep I'd made. The harsh overhead light mercilessly highlighted the stark red circles Zaria had drawn, pinpointing each suspicious transaction. My eyes felt like parched desert, aching for an oasis that wouldn't appear. Then those two words seared themselves into my vision from a particularly damning page: trust fund. I'd almost forgotten it, a modest inheritance from my grandfather, meant to mature on my 30th birthday. A promise of security that should have been a lifeline waiting for me. But I'd never seen a penny, never received a single letter or email. It had simply evaporated, dissolved into thin air. Zaria sat opposite me, her laptop open, glasses perched on her nose. Her fingers danced across the keyboard as she murmured numbers and dates, meticulously piecing together the puzzle that had stolen my future. "You said your grandfather left it in a trust," she asked, her voice sharp with focus. I nodded, my throat tight. "Yeah, it was supposed to be released last year, but I never got a notice. I figured maybe there was a delay, some paperwork thing." Even as the words escaped my lips, I heard the echoing naivety of them. She shook her head, a small, sympathetic frown creasing her brow. "It wasn't a paperwork thing," she stated, her voice clipped, unforgiving. "It was stolen." She turned the screen, a spreadsheet blurring into incomprehensibility until she pointed to a single transaction date, the week after my 30th birthday. "This is when the trust matured," she said, her eyes locked on mine. "And this is when it was redirected. Legally, apparently." She made air quotes, the irony a bitter taste. "Legally redirected to an account in your name, but you never saw it." My stomach plummeted. "How is that even possible?" I croaked. "I never signed anything." Zaria sighed, her face hardening into granite. "You didn't," she confirmed. "But someone did, and your wife had power of attorney access at the time. She was listed as your proxy on file because of the concussion you had." The memory struck me like a physical blow. That concussion, a minor car accident on my way home. Alex had fussed over me, made me soup, even arranged my follow-up appointments. I'd felt grateful, even lucky, to have a wife so caring, so willing to handle the paperwork. I'd signed forms she'd presented, unquestioningly, unreading, because I trusted her, because I believed she was on my side. Zaria leaned back, her gaze piercing. "Your signature was on the release form," she revealed. "But on that date, you were in the hospital, recovering. There's no way you signed that." She handed me a printout, my signature staring back like a ghost from a life I thought I'd lived. "Honestly, Brennan's signature is listed as the witness," she added, the final crushing blow. "And that's how they did it." My vision blurred, fury and disbelief clashing in a tempest that threatened to consume me. "So, they forged my signature?" I articulated slowly, the words tasting of poison. "They took the money and left me with nothing." Zaria nodded, a grim confirmation. "That's exactly what they did." I leaned back, the crushing weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest. "How much was in that trust?" I asked, a part of me dreading the answer. "Enough," she said, her voice unexpectedly gentle. "It wasn't millions, but it was a foundation. A way to start over if you ever needed it." And now she trailed off, but the unspoken truth hung heavy in the air. It was gone. I thought of my grandfather, a quiet man who had toiled at 2 jobs his entire life just to ensure I'd have a small something to lean on. I remembered his gentle smile across the dinner table, his hands rough from decades of honest labor. What would he say if he knew the woman I'd married had stolen his gift and handed it to her brother? My fists clenched, nails biting into my palms. I'd given Alex everything, my love, my trust, my future, and she'd tossed it away like a party favor. "I want it back," I declared, my voice low but resolute. Zaria's smile was thin yet fierce. "We will," she vowed. "We'll file a complaint with the trust administrator. We'll notify the bank that accepted the transfer, and we'll get a lawyer who knows how to handle fraud." She paused, her gaze steady. "But you have to be ready. It's going to get ugly." I nodded. "I've seen ugly," I muttered. "This is personal now." She closed her laptop, leaning forward, her voice almost a reluctant whisper. "There's one more thing. Your aunt, the trust executive. She sent over the scanned forms. She's upset, to say the least. She said you'd always been responsible, that you'd never even asked about the trust because you wanted to make it on your own." My chest tightened. That was true. I'd told myself I'd wait until I'd earned it, until I deserved it. And now that very patience had been weaponized against me. Zaria handed me the printed form with my forged signature, the date circled in stark red. "She said she'd help," she added softly. "She feels guilty." I stared at the paper, my name forged in a script that mimicked my own but felt utterly alien. I pictured Alex's hand guiding the pen, Brennan's smug smirk as he signed the witness line. The betrayal cut deeper than any scalpel. "She knew exactly how to get to me," I said, my voice trembling with contained rage. "She used every bit of trust I gave her and turned it into this." Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them away. I wouldn't give them that power. "She played the long game," I continued, "and I let her." Zaria reached over, placing a steady, grounding hand on mine. "She didn't win," she asserted. "Not yet. You're still here. You're still fighting." I nodded, a grim determination settling over me like new armor. "Then let's fight," I declared. "Let's burn every bridge they built on my back." She smiled, a flash of steel in her eyes. "That's the spirit," she said. "Tomorrow we meet with the lawyer, and then we make them wish they'd never underestimated you." I exhaled, the rage and pain still burning, but now tempered with a purpose I hadn't felt in weeks. Alex and Brennan had taken so much, my money, my trust, even the last gift my grandfather had left me. But they hadn't taken everything. They hadn't taken me, and I would fight to ensure they never did again. Alex's invitation arrived as a casual text message, its tone so blithe it almost made me choke on my coffee. "Dinner tomorrow night. Just us. Let's clear the air." As if everything she'd done could be wiped clean with a single meal. I stared at the screen, a chilling wonder if she truly believed my trust was hers to command anymore. Matteo, across from me, watched the storm brewing on my face. "Are you going to go?" he finally asked. I met his gaze and nodded. "I am," I affirmed. "But I'm not going alone." He didn't even need to ask who I'd bring. We both knew. Zaria agreed instantly. "I'll come as your financial advisor," she stated, her eyes glinting with quiet satisfaction. "We'll treat it like any other meeting." I wanted to thank her, but the words snagged in my throat. Instead, I simply nodded, grateful for her calm, unwavering strength. The next evening, I donned a collared shirt that felt suffocatingly tight around my neck. My reflection in the mirror showed a man worn but resolute, a man who had crawled through hell and emerged. Matteo drove us to the restaurant. a trendy bistro Alex had no doubt chosen to showcase her sophisticated, put-together facade to the waitstaff. A small, incredulous part of me marveled at her audacious gall. The larger part felt like I was walking into a war zone. She was already there, seated by the window, a glass of white wine in hand. Brennan hovered beside her, a loyal watchdog, his smile too wide, too rehearsed. My jaw clenched. Zarya placed a reassuring hand on my arm as we approached. "Just breathe," she murmured. "One breath, then another." As we reached the table, Alex's eyes flickered to Zarya, her practiced smile faltering for a beat before snapping back into place. "Hi," she chirped, her tone sickly sweet. "Honey, I didn't realize you'd be bringing someone." She gestured to the empty chairs. "Sit, please." Brennan's smirk returned. "This is supposed to be a family dinner," he added, his voice laced with thinly veiled aggression. "You sure you want to bring an outsider?" Zarya met his gaze coolly. "I'm here in a professional capacity," she stated evenly. "You don't mind, do you?" Brennan's smirk vanished. We ordered some overpriced salmon, which resembled nothing so much as a garnish. An uneasy silence descended upon the table. Alex cleared her throat, offering me a manufactured smile. "I wanted to talk about everything that's happened," she began, her voice soft, manipulative. "Things got messy, I know that, but we can still work things out." My heart hardened into stone. "Like how you worked out my trust fund?" I asked, my tone sharper than intended. Her eyes widened, but she recovered quickly. "That was a misunderstanding," she claimed, glancing at Brennan. "We were just trying to consolidate accounts. For us." I let out a bitter, mocking laugh. "For us?" I shook my head, the disbelief a tangible weight. "That money was mine. My grandfather left it to me. And you forged my signature to get it." Brennan leaned forward, his eyes as cold as a winter night. "You're being dramatic," he scoffed. "It's not like we stole from you." Zarya's eyebrow arched, a silent yet devastating retort. "Actually, that's exactly what you did," she corrected, pulling a file from her bag and laying it on the table. Brennan's face went ashen. Alex's smile evaporated. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice trembling. Zarya's tone was calm yet edged with lethal steel. "It's a summary of every suspicious financial transaction tied to your accounts," she explained. "Withdrawals, shell companies, forged documents, everything. And before you argue, we've already shared it with legal counsel." Alex's jaw dropped. Brennan's hand clenched around his glass, knuckles white. "You can't just—" he began, but I cut him off. "I can," I asserted, my voice trembling with a righteous fury. "Because it's mine, my money, my life, and I'm done letting you treat me like an afterthought." Alex's eyes darted between us, her confidence draining with every passing second. But we're married," she stammered. "We were building a life together. Brennan needed help with his business, and I thought—" "You thought wrong," I snapped. "You thought I'd never notice? That I'd keep working and paying the bills while you funneled everything we'd saved into his failing company?" Brennan's face flushed crimson. "Brinrest Ventures is not failing," he spat. Zarya arched an eyebrow. "Then how do you plan to cover the convertible note gap?" she asked, her voice a silk-lined dagger. His mouth opened, then clamped shut. Alex looked at him, her face crumpling. "Brennan," she whispered. His silence was all the answer she needed. Zarya leaned forward, her voice low and lethal. "I've already shared everything with the lawyer," she stated. "You'll both be hearing from them soon, and from the IRS, and from the bank that handled the trust." Alex's face turned bone white. She looked at me, her eyes desperate. "Please," she whispered. "We can fix this. We can start over." Something shifted inside me then, a final, irrevocable severing of whatever love I'd once harbored for her. "You ended this," I said quietly, "the day you chose him over me, the day you decided a pitch deck was more important than my life." Brennan made a noise of protest, but Zaria silenced him with a glance. "It's over," she declared. "The accounts are frozen. The authorities are involved. You'd better get yourselves a good lawyer." The waiter brought the check, and I reached for it, but Zaria placed her hand over mine. "Let me," she said. "Consider it part of the service." Alex watched us, her eyes hollow. Brennan stood abruptly, muttering something about getting ahead of this. I watched them walk away hand in hand, but I felt no old pang of loss. I felt nothing but a profound, liberating relief. I turned to Zaria, my chest light for the first time in months. "Thank you," I said, the words heavy with genuine gratitude. She smiled, a warmth that felt like the sun breaking through long-held clouds. "You did the hard part," she said. "You faced them." I nodded. "Yeah," I murmured, "and now I get to rebuild." As we walked out into the cool night air, I realized that I had finally truly begun to feel free. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a very long time, it was mine. 2 weeks dissolved into a relentless blur of phone calls, legal meetings, and email chains that felt like spiderwebs tangling around my neck. Each morning I awoke to a fresh volley of messages, my lawyer's crisp summaries of case status updates, Zaria's latest financial discoveries, Sarah's HR documentation. It was a formidable fortress, meticulously built in my inbox against the chaos that had consumed my life. Matteo checked in every day, his voice a steady, comforting lifeline, anchoring me to something real. But the nights were the true torment. That's when the memories would come, unbidden. Alex's cold voice in the conference room, Brennan's smug smirk as he signed papers that bore my name. Every lie replayed itself, a broken film reel looping endlessly, daring me to forget. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. The fallout began subtly. A small article, almost hidden on the second page of the business section, Brinrest Ventures under investigation for financial mismanagement. I read it twice, the words sinking in like slow poison. I'd spent so many nights hating myself for missing the signs, for my unforgivable blindness to the games they played. Seeing it in print felt like a public confession of my own failure. But then I saw Brennan's name, stark in black and white, and a cold certainty settled. The game was over. His investors pulled out just days later. Matteo called the moment the news broke. "They're on the run, man," he said, laughter and disbelief warring in his voice. "They're finally paying the price." Alex's name surfaced next, quietly at first, a mere whisper in the HR circles she'd once boasted about. A consulting firm she'd worked with on side projects flagged her in an internal fraud review. The rumor spread like wildfire, and within days she was escorted out, her ID badge confiscated, her email deactivated. I pictured her standing outside the gleaming glass tower she'd once called her second home, clutching a cardboard box of the thing she'd stolen, her eyes wide, her mouth pressed tight. A small, silent part of me felt a flicker of pity, but it was quickly extinguished. When the official fraud complaints hit, it was the final, inevitable domino falling. Zaria's meticulous reports had laid bare every transaction, every forged signature, every phantom shell company. My lawyer filed them all in neat, ruthless succession: the stolen trust fund, the forged documents, the illicit bank transfers. Every piece of evidence was a nail hammered into the coffin they'd built for themselves. Brennan's smirk was gone from my mind now, replaced by the chilling image of panic that must have seized him when the bank accounts froze, when the IRS came knocking, when the investors demanded their money back. Alex's flimsy excuses, her hollow tears, her desperate promises to make it right, all dissolved in the face of cold, hard facts. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, I sat on the small balcony of my temporary apartment, the stack of reports resting in my lap. I watched the light fade and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not the kind that comes from forgetting, but the profound peace that comes from knowing you've done everything you could. The very systems they had abused, financial, legal, personal, were now turning against them. I didn't need to scream or fight anymore. I simply needed to let the truth do its relentless work. Matteo knocked, two quick familiar taps that spoke of friendship, not intrusion. He stepped onto the balcony, a six-pack of cheap beer in hand. "You've got that look," he said, handing me a bottle. "The look of a man who's finally free." I took it, the cold glass grounding me. "It's not over yet," I admitted, "but it's starting to feel like it could be." He nodded, his eyes fixed on the city lights. "They thought they could bleed you dry and walk away smiling," he said. "But you fought back. You didn't roll over. That's what matters." I took a sip, the bitterness sharp but honest. "I think the hardest part was realizing I couldn't trust her," I confessed. "I spent so long telling myself she'd come back, that she'd apologize, that somehow it was all a mistake." Matteo's gaze softened. "That's what good people do," he said. "They give second chances. But man, sometimes you've got to protect yourself. You did that. You didn't let her keep you down." I nodded, his words soaking in like rain on parched ground. "I just wanted to be loved," I said quietly. "That's all I ever wanted." Matteo leaned over and clinked his bottle against mine. "And you will be," he promised. "The right way, with the right person. You've got to believe that." We sat in comfortable silence, the city breathing around us. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe too. The next morning, my lawyer called. "Brinrest Ventures is officially dissolving," he announced, his voice triumphant. "Federal auditors are stepping in, and there's talk of criminal charges. It's going to get messy for them." A tremendous weight lifted from my chest, a quiet, profound exhale of relief. "And Alex?" I asked. He hesitated. "She's under investigation, too," he finally confirmed. "Her name is on the documents. They're looking at her involvement." I closed my eyes, a bittersweet ache in my chest. I'd loved her once, fiercely, but the woman who had lied, who had stolen, who had left me on that gurney alone, she was a stranger now. "Let them investigate," I said. "She earned it." That night, I slept like a man who no longer had to watch his back in his own home. The dreams were different. No more shadows of betrayal, no more panic-stricken calls to a woman who wouldn't answer. Just a quiet darkness, peaceful and whole. I woke to the sun streaming through the window, a warm glow on my face. It felt like a new day, a new life. Matteo was already in the kitchen, coffee brewing. "Big day," he said, handing me a mug. "You ready?" I nodded. "Yeah," I replied. "I am." Because for the first time in months, I wasn't running from the pain anymore. I'd faced it, I'd fought it. And now I was free, free from lies, free from the guilt that had shackled me to people who didn't deserve me, free to start over on my own terms. And that freedom tasted better than any victory I'd ever imagined. I didn't expect the call from Alex's father. The number popped up on my screen, unfamiliar yet unmistakable in its placement in my contacts. My heart skipped a beat, memories flooding back. Family dinners, birthdays, the quiet respect I'd always felt for the man who'd once been my father-in-law. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the answer button before finally pressing it. "Hello," I said, my voice cautious but calm. "It's me," he responded, his voice low and rough, a tone I'd never heard from him before. "I don't know what happened," he began, and I could hear the disbelief in his words, the way they trembled. She used to be so kind. I closed my eyes and took a breath. Kind once, perhaps, before the lies, before the money, before Brennan and his promises of some tech empire that never materialized. I could hear the pain in his voice, a father who just discovered his daughter was a stranger. She changed, I said quietly. Somewhere along the way, she changed. He let out a sigh that sounded like the weight of the world had settled on his chest. I raised her to be honest, he said, to stand by the people she loved. I don't know where that went. His voice cracked. I'm so sorry. The word surprised me, an apology from a man who'd done nothing wrong, who'd been blindsided like I had. You don't owe me an apology, I said gently. She made her choices. Silence hung on the line, stretching like a rubber band about to snap. Then he spoke again, his voice steadier now. She's been cut off, he revealed. No more support, no more family funds. If she wants to fix this, she's on her own. The finality in his voice was like a door slamming shut. I nodded, though he couldn't see it. That's fair, I said. She's had enough lifelines. A pause, then a sigh. I always thought you were good for her, he said, the words heavy with regret. I never thought she'd hurt you like this. My chest tightened. I never thought she'd hurt me like this either, I admitted. But she did. He cleared his throat, his voice softening. If you need anything, you call me, he said. I mean that. I swallowed, the words catching in my throat. Thank you, I whispered. That means more than you know. We ended the call with a quiet goodbye, a shared sorrow that neither of us could fully name. I set the phone down and stared at the wall, the weight of everything pressing in on me. But there was a strange comfort in knowing he'd seen it too, that even her own father couldn't deny what she'd become. Brennan's call came later that night. I let it go to voicemail, but his voice still crawled through the speaker. We're family, he pleaded, his tone slick with desperation. Can we work something out? A sharp, bitter laugh bubbled up in my chest. Family, I muttered. Were we family when I was on the operating table? I thought of his laughter in the hallway, the way he'd looked right past me. Were we family when you drained our accounts to save your app? I hit delete without listening to the rest. The silence that followed felt like peace. I knew then that the ties they'd once wrapped around me were gone, cut clean. No regrets. The darkness had lifted and I was free. The day Brennan's company officially dissolved was a day I'd marked on the calendar in vivid red. It wasn't about revenge, it was about closure. The final confirmation that I wasn't insane, that everything I'd felt and feared had been devastatingly real. I arrived at my new place, a small, light-filled loft that felt like a breath of fresh air after months in the suffocating dark, just as my phone buzzed with the email, Brinrest Ventures, LLC, dissolution filed. A simple subject line, yet it resonated like a victory march. I opened the email, reading the first line aloud, a small smile playing at the corners of my mouth. Effective immediately, I declared, my voice calm but certain. The company known as Brinrest Ventures is dissolved, pending federal investigation. It was more than a document, it was proof. Proof that the insidious web they'd spun was finally unraveling. Mateo was waiting inside, a paint roller in hand, his t-shirt splattered with streaks of blue. You're looking at a free man, he grinned, motioning to the freshly painted walls. Help me with this trim or I'm going to regret offering to help you move. I laughed, the sound light and unburdened. I'll get the corners, I said, picking up a brush. The invigorating smell of fresh paint and new beginnings filled the air. And for the first time in months, I felt like I was building something that couldn't be snatched away. Every stroke of the roller was a step forward. every splash of color a silent promise to myself. I would live and I would thrive on my own terms. Zarya stopped by later, a stack of files in her arms, her eyes shining with triumph. "The financial plan is in place," she announced, laying the folders on the counter like blueprints for a brighter future. "Your accounts are secure, the trust is restored, and the stolen funds are being recovered. It's going to take time, but you're protected now." She smiled, and I saw the weariness in her eyes, the exhaustion from months of fighting battles that weren't even hers to fight. "Thank you," I said, the words thick with profound gratitude. "I don't know how to—" She waved me off, her smile turning wry. "You don't have to," she said. "Just don't let them take your peace again." Later that night, I found myself at the small neighborhood bar down the street. Sarah met me there, a genuine grin on her face that made me feel lighter just by seeing it. "You look different," she observed, sliding a whiskey across the table. "Less like a man on a gurney, more like a man who just escaped a sinking ship." I laughed, the sound genuine and unforced. "I guess that's accurate," I admitted. "We talked about everything and nothing, old jobs, bad dates, the kind of small, everyday joys that make life worth living." At some point, the conversation drifted to the future. "What now?" she asked, her eyes curious but gentle. I took a slow sip of my drink, letting the warmth settle in my chest. "I don't know," I confessed, "but I know it's going to be my future this time. No more lifelines tied to the wrong people." Sarah leaned back, her smile warm and understanding. "That's a good place to start," she said. And in that moment, I realized that starting over didn't have to mean starting alone. A week later, I was unpacking the last box when I heard a knock at the door. I opened it to find Alex standing there, her eyes hollow, shoulders slumped. She held a small duffel bag in one hand as if she'd just arrived from some cheap motel. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice cracking. For a moment I hesitated, the old ache stirring in my chest, the part of me that still remembered the girl who'd once held my hand through late nights and hard days. But that girl was gone, replaced by someone who'd sold my trust for a quick, fleeting win. I stepped aside, motioning her in. She stood in the middle of the room, her eyes scanning the fresh paint and the bright light. "You've made it nice," she said, her voice small. I didn't respond. She shifted on her feet. "I've lost everything," she whispered. "Brennan's gone. The investors. They're coming after me now." Her voice cracked, utterly broken. "I don't know what to do." I took a breath, the pain sharp but necessary. "You did this to yourself," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "You had choices. You chose him over me. You chose greed over love." Her eyes filled with tears. "We can start over," she pleaded. "We can fix this." I shook my head. "No," I said. "You already ended it the day you chose your brother over my life." I met her gaze, steady and unwavering. "I'm not angry anymore, but I'm not yours to save anymore either." She sobbed then, quiet and broken, the sound of a woman who had finally, truly realized the devastating consequences of her actions. I watched her go, the door closing behind her like the final definitive period at the end of a long, ugly chapter. I leaned against the frame for a moment, letting the full weight of it settle over me, and then I turned back to my new life, the clean scent of fresh paint still lingering. Mateo was right. I was a free man, free from the lies, the suffocating silence, the pervasive shadows of betrayal, free to build something real with people who had proven themselves by standing beside me, not by taking from me. I poured myself a drink and stepped out onto the balcony, the city alive beneath me. The hum of cars and laughter carried on the breeze, and I felt a smile tug at the corner of my mouth. The future wasn't written yet, but it was mine to shape, I closed my eyes, breathing in the cool night air, and felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Not loud, not flashy, just real. And for the first time in a very long time, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. Ladies and gentlemen, since you've listened to the end of this story, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments which state you're watching from. Let's see what percentage of elite viewers make it to the end. And please kindly turn your attention to the screen after this message. There you'll find a full playlist of thrilling stories, a subscribe button for the channel, and our most captivating story. Click, enjoy, and thank you.